All right, welcome everyone. You are here for the Grad Talks in case you just need a double check. This session will be recorded for students who are unable to attend. We please ask that you use the Q&A feature for any questions or comments. If you have any questions during the presentation, please raise your hand and I will call on you and allow you to unmute yourself so you can ask the question live to Chris. Please be respectful and attentive to the presenter to maximize the benefit of attending this session. Today's session is going to be on developing a successful Ford Fellowship application. Today we have Chris, and he grew up in San Diego, obtained degrees in physics and mathematics at UC San Diego, then went to Boston University for grad school in astronomy, where he was a Ford Fellow and an NSF/GK12 Fellow, studying low mass stars. He's now back at UC San Diego at the Center of Astrophysics and Space Sciences as a NASA Sagan postdoctoral fellow. He also worked briefly in industry as a data scientist at Booz Allen Hamilton. So he is familiar with both academic and non-academic career directories. We hope you take advantage of this opportunity to learn more and to learn together. So with that, Chris, go ahead and take it away.
Thanks, Sarah. So I was asked to talk about the Ford Fellowship today, but really there's nothing I could tell you specific to the Ford Fellowship that isn't applicable to any fellowship or really any application that you're writing for anything in academia. Industry is slightly different, but academia, like usually there's a few high-level things that you want to tackle. So I should say in full disclosure that I got the Ford like a decade ago now, so things may be slightly different than they were when I applied for it, although from looking at it, I don't think they are. And I haven't been on the review panel, so even though I received the fellowship, I couldn't tell you what they liked, what they didn't like about my application, or the types of discussions that happen around there. But with that, I'll get into this. So if you're not familiar with PhD comics, I thought I would toss something up to kind of lighten the discussion. PhD comics was a staple of my graduate school career. It really got me through some tough times, just from the idea that these are shared experiences, the good and the bad, that you have with grad students all over the world. And these kind of help to make you feel a little more connected to the community in general. So here's, professor gets congratulations from a student who he wrote a letter for, who got a fellowship, and he said, "Oh yeah, I did great work," of course. Okay, so I'm going to start with things not to do. And these, I'm going to go through lists of things that you shouldn't do, things you should do, and I've kind of segmented them into the research proposal and the statement of purpose, or personal statement, however it's called these days. So some of the things you're going to see on these slides are inverses of each other, but I'll get to that when we get to the next few slides. So the first thing you don't want to do is be vague. You really don't want to be vague. Vague is just something that can really kill a good proposal. I give you an example here of, I'm going to do something and magic will happen. You really want to avoid being vague as much as possible. And I challenge you to read and reread your proposal over and over and ask yourself as you're reading each sentence, does this sentence add value? Is this something that, like, if I just took it out, it wouldn't change anything about my proposal? And another thing that I've seen a lot is, I called it forgetting to do your homework, but the idea that people don't do a sanity check if something is feasible. A lot of times there's easy back of the envelope calculations you can do to get order of magnitude estimates for what you might expect. And then if that's feasible with the instrument that you're talking about using, things like that you should really do, because if you don't do it, it comes off as lazy or that you just don't fully understand like how to do that. And if you do it, then it shows that you're very thorough and methodical. Um, so it's a very positive thing to do something like that. Don't start this late. If the forward is due at the end of this month and you're just starting it, that's pushing it pretty close, in my opinion. Start as early as humanly possible, because this should go through many revisions, and the more revisions it goes through, the better it's going to be. Some of the best proposals I've worked on with students, we started months before they were due, and what they look like at the beginning and what they look like at the end were completely different. What not to do: don't let anyone review it. You should let as many people as are willing to read this thing read it, because things always get better when you get lots of differing opinions. Because presumably if you're asking people higher up, or even from other grad students, these are questions that could come up in review panels. So all the things that these people have for suggestions and comments are things that you can fix now so that later on a review panel can't ding you for them. Oh, and I should say, feel free to ask questions at any time. I have the Q&A window open. This is totally not incredibly formal. So if you have a question about anything in specific, feel free. So these are the to-dos for the research proposal, and some of these are the inverse of the not to do. So be specific. I'm going to measure all of the X, and that will allow me to constrain Y. Don't have a throwaway sentence in there. You want to be as specific as possible with everything that you write in here. You also want to use the correct level of jargon. So for the forward in particular, I think that people are from your field, but not necessarily your subfield. That's my understanding. So you should, if you're in, a subfield of bio, you should assume that everyone is going to be a biologist, but maybe not in your exact subfield. So there's some things you might want to explain in detail or define that maybe you wouldn't have to define if you were just talking to like your PI or your direct collaborators. Make sure that you have a coherent argument in your proposal. It should really, everything that you say in your proposal should follow from the thing before it. Sometimes people write a proposal and it kind of jumps all over the place in the ideas. You want to make sure that everything has a logical flow, that A and then B and then C happen. And I think just having other people read your writing will help you tailor that if that's something that you struggle with, because certainly I had a lot of issues with that, and getting lots and lots of constructive criticism on my writing helped me to become a better writer in that sense. One other thing that's good for that is to make an outline. If you can just make a simple outline of all the steps that need to be done in what order, then that can help you to organize the flow of your proposal. In your proposal, I would set goals. Sometimes these are called specific aims in certain fields. These are things that you want to accomplish, and then you set out exactly how you're going to accomplish it. But as long as they know that there is a goal that you're working for, then that will help to organize your proposal. And make sure that they're realistic goals. Sometimes people, want to cure cancer, and while that's admirable, it's not necessarily feasible. So make sure that all of your goals are reasonable goals for a graduate student. And similarly to that, you want to make sure that the timeline fits. This proposal should be for a graduate school lifespan. So somewhere between 3 and 7 years, probably, depending on what your field is. You want to make sure that everything is doable and that these are skills that you can acquire. You don't have to know how to do everything necessarily off the bat. I mean, that's not what graduate school is about. You're going to gain some skills. So you can put in the things that you'll have to learn, but just make sure that all the projects you line up seem like they could be done during your graduate school time. And then another thing that you'll see in a lot of successful proposals is that you highlight things in bold. Like if you're going to produce something, you want to highlight that. You want to make that stand out in your proposal. Like I am going to deliver a catalog of this, or I am going to have a, I don't know, an algorithm that does this. Like those types of things, you want them to stand out in your proposal. So don't be afraid to use boldface or even to italicize things that you want to emphasize within your proposal. Those are really good tools. Getting to the point quickly is an actually really important aspect of this. I don't know how many proposals a Ford reviewer will look at, but some fellowships, maybe the person will read 10 of them, and if they all kind of bleed together, you want yours to stand out. And one way that helps the reader want to keep reading your proposal is to make it interesting right away. So you want to kind of get to the big picture problem definitely within the first paragraph, but even within the first few sentences, like set up a really intriguing problem is a good key strategy to a successful proposal. And then the last few things are just like things that I highly, highly, highly suggest. Read other successful proposals. The only way that you become a better writer is through practice, but that means you practicing your own writing, but also reading other successful proposals and then figuring out what made them successful. What were the elements in all of these proposals? All of them are going to be different. They're probably different projects, but there's going to be elements that you see in all of these things that make them successful proposals. So if you know somebody, or if there's a resource within your department, I would reach out and ask for a copy, see if they'd be willing to share it for you. And then I mentioned don't start late, but you should definitely start early. The earlier you start, the better it is. And that becomes harder and harder to do the longer you're in academia. So it is a good idea now as a grad student to start these fellowships early, to learn all these skills that make for successful proposals. Because once you're at the level of being a professor, you're not going to have a long time to work on these proposals. So you need to cultivate these skills now so that later on you are very effective at writing a good proposal very quickly. And then again, let other people give you comments and suggestions. As many people as you can get to read this, you should have them read it and provide you feedback. And I've let my friends who are both academic and non-academic read it, just because different people pick up on different things. Sometimes grammar slips through the cracks, and just having lots of people read it will help fix things as simple as grammar mistakes. Okay, so here's another little segue, another PhD comment. So I'll let you all read this, but the next part of this talk is going to be about the personal statement or the statement of purpose. And again, I'm going to start with things not to do. So the number one thing you don't want to do in a personal statement, and this is the folly of many grad students, is to be cliche. So my subfield is astronomy, and one thing you see a lot is somebody starting off their statement saying, I've always stared up at the stars and dreamed of being an astronomer. But you want to be very unique, and you want to start unique. You don't even want to start with something cliche at the beginning, because if you write something that 100 other applicants could have written too, then you're just going to kind of meld into that reader's mind with all the other 100 applicants that wrote that exact same thing. So I would suggest that you really read all the sentences in your statement of purpose and ask yourself, is this something that 100 other people might write? Like, how unique is this to my life? Another thing, and I talked about this in the research proposal, but don't be vague. This is something else that people are in their personal statements. So, they could say something like, I've had a hard life. And that really, it doesn't mean anything if you don't have some evidence to back it up. So I would avoid writing sentences like that. And again, don't start late and don't let anyone read it. Those are bad things. Like, start early for your statement of purpose also, and let as many people as you can stomach read it. It's going to make it better. And then things you want to do, you certainly want to be unique as possible. So I give you a little example of how you could change that's gazing up at the stars comment. I'll let you read this little thing I wrote. But that's although that's, probably not what you're gonna read, that's very unique. Like, if I read something like that, I'd be like, this is gonna be a very interesting personal statement. So that's the mindset you want to have when you're writing this is this a compelling story that is specific to me, that's gonna want to make people read it? Think about the things that you've read in your life that were hard to put down. That's exactly what you want to write. And the other big thing I would say is be honest. If there are things in your academic record that you're worried about, like GPA or whatnot, that have very good reasons, but they don't come across just from looking at your transcript, then you should mention those. You should explain them. You can use that as a strength rather than a weakness. And you can also ask letter writers to address that if they know about your own struggles or whatever the story is. That's something that they can write, and that has a lot of meaning in it too, because that means that they know you on that level, on maybe a more personal level, which can help to show how you cultivate relationships with your letter writers. And last few things that I suggest. Picking a theme is something that I've seen in a lot of very successful proposals. It could be anything, maybe it's just about the general hardships of your life, but then you have lots of different stories that are related to that theme. Um, could be the theme of like why you wanted to be an engineer, but then you have very specific stories related to that theme. There's lots of different ways you could do it, but that's a nice way to organize a personal statement, is to pick a theme and have kind of the first few sentences or paragraph like kind of lay out the framework of that theme, and then you keep tying back to it through your writing. And then be specific again. So in the previous slide I had the example of, I have had a hard life, but saying something like, growing up in a family of 12 siblings, it was hard to concentrate on academics. That's very specific and shows that you had this thing that made your life kind of hard. And then again, read successful proposals and start as early as you possibly can, and let as many people as you can read it and give you comments and suggestions. So those are all kind of the general tips that I would suggest for writing these things. I will do one more comment as we move into the last kind of portion of the talk. So hopefully by the end of this, if you were not familiar with PhD comics, you'll go and you'll read a few. I think you'll find them to be quite enjoyable, especially the ones that you can relate to in your own academic life. Okay, so here are a couple of asides that hopefully, since you're in grad school, maybe some of these you understand and you realize now. One of them is that when you're asking your letter writers to write you a letter, it's good to ask them specifically if they can write you a positive or a good letter. You don't want to be ambiguous about just writing a letter. You want to make sure that what they write you is going to be a positive letter. So use that language. And then that way, if for whatever reason they feel like they can't write you a positive letter, they'll suggest you ask somebody else to write. And that's fine. That happens all the time. And I've seen this one happen more times than I care to admit, but make sure as due dates are coming close that you start emailing, pinging however you can your letter writers if they haven't submitted yet, because chances are if they haven't submitted it, it's probably just slipped their mind. Like they have a million things going on. If they're PIs, they have, teaching and research and students, and that's not including their own personal lives. So it's it's not a bad thing. It's not rude to email them like every day during the last week that the fellowship is due. It will be useful. I've seen people not do this, and then maybe a deadline gets missed. And none of these, NSF, Ford, none of these institutions accept late letters. So if a letter slips, then that's just a letter you're not going to get. So certainly email people about writing your letters. And the last thing is absolutely the most unfortunate part of the whole application process, but it's a reality. So you should definitely know this. I call it the random number generator, but really it's just the randomness of proposals. So, we would like to say that there are no biases in this. And I think, at least, certainly for myself and most of the colleagues I've had, we try to remove all the biases that we know of. But, whether you're the first application read or the last application read, it does have a deciding factor on how your application is viewed. If, it's fresh in their mind, or if it kind of fell into a bunch of other things. Did the person have coffee that day? Were they tired? There's so many different random factors. So I would say, if you don't get a fellowship, don't take that as, you're not good enough, or you weren't good enough for this fellowship. In academia, even the most successful people probably get a lot more no's than they do yeses. So it is part of this process, is to understand how to deal with rejection, but like grow from it, and try and make things that are harder and harder to say no to. But it happens to all of us, so certainly don't take it personally. It's just the way things work. So with that, I have one last slide, which is just some useful resources. And this first one, the profellow.com in particular, they have lots of different articles written by successful fellowship winners on lots of different fellowships that have their own takes on the do's and don'ts. So feel free to look at those too. There's no, one size fits all recipe for writing a successful fellowship. So successful writing is going to look different for everyone, probably, but I try to give some high level ideas of what can improve your fellowship application. And that's all I have. So I'm happy to take any questions anyone has.
Just as a reminder, anyone can ask questions in the Q&A, or if you'd like to speak your question, just raise your hand, which you can find in the participants tab. You should be able to raise hand, and I can allow you to talk. You have a question, Zara?
Hi. Thank you for sharing your tips with us. I had a question about the research plan. I know you were talking about how it has to like kind of like be realistic and fit into the 3, 4, 5 years of graduate school. I was wondering if it has to be kind of like the plan for the whole like PhD process, or in terms of like the aims and stuff, or can it just be like maybe two like big aims that you're trying to achieve, but it's not like the whole project because you still don't know what's going to happen?
Yeah, that's a great question. So since the Ford Fellowship is broken up into a few pieces, there's the pre-doctoral and then the dissertation year fellowship. I would say that I think it's totally acceptable to have it be just a couple of the specific aims of the larger portion, since you're only being funded for, maybe like half to two-thirds of your total time in grad school. I think that's totally fine as long as it's a well thought out. Each specific aim is typically in and of itself its own project. So as long as those pieces are well thought out, I think that's totally fine. I know it is also rough because the limitations that they force on the research proposal are pretty stringent. At least when I did it, it was 2 pages, double spaced, I think, which is rough.
Right.
Yeah.
And so a question, what is really a difference between the dissertation and the pre-doctoral? Because I'm a first year master trying to transition into PhD. Um, I would still be considered as a pre-doctoral, right?
Yes. Yeah. The dissertation year, that basically means you only have a year or two until you're done. I think you have to have finished every single requirement for your PhD program except for defending the dissertation. So the idea is that it helps you maybe finish off that last project and write it into your dissertation so that you can graduate. But you would certainly be a pre-doctoral fellow at your level.
I see. Thank you for that.
Hmm?
And another thing I wanted to ask was, because I did apply for Ford Fellowship last year, but I did not get it. And one of the things, big things that the both reviewers kind of commented on was the fact about, I'm going to read it. The statement did not present evidence that the applicant is preparing for an academic career with a focus on mentoring.
Hmm.
And
Yeah. So this kind of feeds into one of the things I mentioned before, which is that I have not myself been on the review panel, so it's hard for me to know specifically how things are weighted. But it sounds like they do weight the mentoring that you've done in the past and that you plan to do in the future as part of that. And that's probably something that would be easiest to address in a personal statement, is whatever your mentorship experiences have been and maybe what kind of mentorship you plan on doing in the future. In a lot of proposals, those are considered broader impacts. Like, how are you going to bring this out to people, on a lower level than you, but also to the broader community, whether that be scientific or public. Um, I mean, sometimes even in a research proposal, they'll talk about how they're going to work with undergraduate students on like this project and that project, and that this is a good place for them to build some of these essential skills that they might need if they want to go to grad school too.
yeah, makes sense. Yeah, I didn't have a lot of mentoring to talk about last year, but since then, I have more to talk about. Hopefully this year, because that was like the big theme. They
Mm.
didn't really mind my research plan. They liked it, but yeah, the mentoring part was a big thing.
Yeah. Well, good luck. I mean, sometimes that's all it takes is 1 year to kind of fill in those gaps from whatever the comments are. I've certainly seen that lots of times where somebody doesn't get it the first time and then the second time they do because they've fixed all the things that the review committee didn't like or thought was weaknesses.
Right.
Yeah.
And would you be willing to kind of like read statements? I know it's like a lot, and you're busy probably.
When is the Ford due? I don't remember.
Yeah, the fourth. I was looking at the deadline. It's due December 16th, I believe. So it's quite a time until then. But since I'm applying for NSF as well, which is due next week, I'm kind of gonna go off of the same kind of proposal and the statements that I'm writing for that.
I would be willing to read statements from anyone attending this. Sure. I mean, there's not a ton of people here, so if somebody wanted to send it to me, I would be happy to do that. Considering I'm not in engineering, I'm probably better suited to read personal statements, but I'm also happy to read your research statements if you wanted to send them.
Yeah, sure. And I think the personal statement has a lot of kind of weight since it's kind of like for people who are going to start their PhD.
Mm.
Research isn't, I don't know. I've heard the research part of it. It's important, but it's not as important as the person character. Um, and they,
Yeah, that makes sense.
yeah, thank you for offering that.
Mm-hmm. Somebody asked the question in chat that do you think anyone has very specific life experience to start the statement of purpose with? If there's not such experience, is there any alternative to show my enthusiasm? So, I mean, well, the first thing I want to tell everybody, and maybe you need to sit down and think about this, but like every single person has a unique life. Like maybe it's hard to think about what's unique about your life next to everyone else, but certainly there are memories in your life that make you a unique person in particular. And one thing that I should say is that your statement of purpose doesn't have to be academic in any sense. Like really the statement of purpose is just it's talking about you and the things that you think are interesting within your own life. So whatever story you tell, you just want it to be unique to you. It doesn't have to be that you had a hard life. Some people don't have a hard life, but they have their own unique experiences. Um, what I mean, I can't tell you what your own unique experiences are, but I have never met a person that didn't have a unique experience to themselves. So I think sometimes it's just about digging deep and finding those. And I will tell you honestly the way that I write a personal statement. I'm not necessarily suggesting you do this, but I have lots of my own stories and anecdotes from my life, and some of them are the things that I tell, people the first time I meet them, and some of them are very personal to me. And I know that if I'm writing my personal statement and it makes me a little uncomfortable, that's probably a really compelling personal statement. So, although that's difficult for me, that is kind of the mindset that I try and get, is to write something that is uncomfortable for me to write because I know that that is a very personal statement, and that actually ends up going a long way.
Does anyone else have any questions? So there There is a question in the chat. Does Ford review everyone's application? I applied last year and did not hear from them.
As far as I know, they read every single application. The only reason one of these institutions wouldn't read an application is if it wasn't complete. Did you get any sort of confirmation when you submitted that it was submitted? Just to make sure that they actually got it. So if you don't get feedback, I would email them. Usually there's an email to try and figure out if you can get feedback. And then at least that way you can find out what happened, why you didn't get it. You know, all of these things are run by people, and ultimately they're fallible. So unfortunately, maybe they just forgot to send you the feedback from last year. There's lots of things that could have happened, but I would certainly email them. No, Ford, as far as I know, they read all of the applications.
All right. Last call for questions.
And if you think of a question later on, Sarah and Sinai have my email. I don't mind them sharing that for people who want to get in contact with me after this if they have other questions.
Okay, let me just, I will drop your email in the chat real quick. Okay, so Chris's email is in the chat. And if there's no more questions, we will conclude our grad talk for today. Thank you so much, Chris, for being here and sharing your words and wisdom and comics. I thought they were, even though I wasn't a grad student. And yeah, feel free to reach out to Chris. He's made himself available. And we hope you join us next week.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.